CCFM 107.5.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you to your listeners.
So, just quickly looking back at some of the big stories of 2017 and anything that might have kind of permeated during the festive season that sleepy news, non-news people over that period might have missed out on.
Well, I think one of the big things that we're waiting on this year is whether or not our appeal on the so-called spanking case will be heard by the Constitutional Court.
So straight to the Constitutional Court, how does that work? I mean, because the ruling was made at the High Court, and the ruling being that parents are not allowed to spank, physically discipline their kids in any which way, shape or form, right?
Yes, correct. So what happened at the High Court case was that the judgment removed the former common law defence of moderate and reasonable chastisement from parents. Now, let me be clear. Child abuse, hammering your child, kicking them, punching them, smacking them around the face, that's never ever been allowed by law. But this was a defence that had been given to parents and has been in place for many, many years, that basically allows parental discipline, loving, mild, reasonable parental discipline. And that was taken away by this judgment. So what that means, and it's very important that parents listen to this, is that the lightest slap on the wrist for your child, if reported to the police, will be charged as assault.
Whoa.
The criminal offence of assault. And if convicted, which you may well be, then you will have a criminal record, and that criminal record will effectively be for child abuse. So you have to consider that versus what is in the best interest of the child. Now, nobody is saying that children should be beaten all the time, and nobody is saying that that is the only way that you can discipline your child.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are many, many other ways. But we're in favour of really, I think, as 4SA, we're not for spanking, we're not against spanking, but what we are for is parental rights.
Yeah.
Give parents who love their children the right to choose. And if it is going to be taken away, let it be done by a proper parliamentary process rather than by the stroke of a judicial pen.
Okay. So that's one that goes straight to the Constitutional Court because?
Because it really is effectively a constitutional matter. And that was really what the judgment was deciding. And so the Court of Appeal, which we originally tried for, they referred us straight to the Constitutional Court. So we're now waiting. But obviously that is a big thing.
It is.
And we would really encourage parents to get behind us on this one. And if you go to our 4SA website, and we can give a shameless pitch for that, it's www.forsa.org.za. You can read up on it. There's a video there, a short video clip, and there's also a petition that you can sign. So we would encourage you to do all those things.
And the emphasis, again, just to place it firmly, is with regard to parents' rights, as in that you as a parent can continue to have the right to discipline your child in a way that is legal and fair. Again, many people saying the Bible speaks about spanking and so forth. But again, it's not about child abuse. There are rules and laws and things in place, and it's very clear we should never discipline in anger. But on the other side, just making sure that parents' rights are not eroded, right?
Correct. And obviously the Bible has scriptures which some Christians believe gives them a mandate to discipline their children in a physical way, in a corporate way. But not all Christians believe that either. No. So again, we're not saying that this is an interpretation of the Bible that all Christians must spank their children. Far from it. But we do believe that in love and in reason, that parents should be allowed to continue that rather than be criminalized, which is a very radical sanction, if you like. A criminal record stays with you for life.
That's it.
And you can not get jobs as a result of it. You can be denied visas for international travel because of it. It's a serious, serious sanction. And you have to ask yourself the question at the end of the day, what is in the best interest of the child? And who knows your child best but you as the parent?
Yeah. It would be interesting if the government actually came out and said, you know what, because we see there's a need for parenting upskilling, as in to upskill parents, as in practical ways in which they could discipline their children. It would be wonderful if the government actually said, you know what, we're going to run workshops, we're going to have things on radio and on television and in print media as to some practical ways where you can discipline your child in a way that's going to be helpful for their growth and maturity.
I think it's a both and. I think those things definitely should be happening. But the reality is that in many cases and in many contexts, given the fact that, many millions of South Africans do not live in privileged circumstances, if you're living in a disadvantaged context, how easy is it to remove a privilege from a child when they probably don't have any privileges?
Yeah.
Is there a naughty corner? And frankly, the social science is still very much disputed as to whether or not, which of course the people who want to ban spanking claim, whether it actually is disadvantageous to the child to have grown up with some form of physical discipline. Many studies show no, it's not. In fact, it could even be better for a child. So it's not an obvious choice. So what we're saying is, if we are going to remove it, then let's do so with a proper process. And in the UK, for example, which they're debating this very issue at the moment, in Scotland and in Wales, they're having a campaign which is the pro lobby, if you like, and it says be reasonable.
Yeah.
No, be reasonable about this. Let's be reasonable. Let's not just throw the baby out with the bathwater, because where it has happened, and New Zealand is a case in point, it has not achieved the so-called desirable context. Child abuse is up. Violence against children is up. 25% of parents say they feel less empowered to raise their children. 30% of kids have threatened to report their parents to authorities. So it shifts the whole balance of power in the home.
Yeah.
And we're just saying, let's think about this. Let's consider all these issues before we just simply, with one judicial stroke of a pen, which has already happened, remove this defence completely from parents and potentially criminalise them in the process.
Yeah, so that's a very, very serious thing. And again, that website address is
www.forsa.org.za.
And you can go and sign the petition. You can go and read up more about it. But that's the reality is currently, if you spank your child, any form of physical discipline to your child, you could be held criminally liable, right?
That's absolutely correct.
Sure, that's scary. And talking about parent rights, where does the balance lie when it comes to a child's education? Because something that kind of caught my radar or came up in my radar was the whole homeschooling and parents wanting to say, you know what, actually, I want to try and give my child the best possible opportunity, so I'm going to homeschool them. And there's been rumors and discussions and concerns about the new basic education laws and things that they're wanting to bring in as government.
Correct. Well, the so-called Bella Bill is very much on the table, and submissions have now closed for that. But essentially what the Bella Bill does is two things. First of all, it arbitrarily removes powers from school governing bodies. You see, parents should have and do have the primary responsibility and the right to educate their children. That's been recognised. But what we're seeing is that these powers are being slowly but surely eroded. And so some things like, for example, the appointment of teachers, admissions policies, language policies, whether or not a school can actually rent out its facilities. These are all being taken away from school governing bodies and given to the MEC, the Minister for Education, in a provincial level. So we're seeing that. That's one issue. And the second issue is when it comes to homeschooling, there's definitely an erosion of homeschooling because people homeschool because they basically are not comfortable. This is certainly one reason, with the education, the curriculum and what have you that their children are getting in public schools, assuming that they're going to public schools. And what we're seeing there is that this is now being taken away in as much as that is more and more onerous. The provisions that are for reporting that you now have to present or potentially have inspections of what you're teaching, how you're teaching. Cottage schools, which is basically where a group of homeschoolers might go to a particular tutor, the definition is being changed so that it must be in the actual home. And so those cottage schools, which are great help to parents and certainly economically helpful to parents, are also under threat. So we're just seeing, I think what we're seeing, Jonathan, which is, again, a very unhealthy trend, is the erosion of parents' rights. And that is, I think, something which we need to be very watchful of, because who knows best how to bring up our children, but we do as parents. And once those interventions are made, you effectively are separating parents from being able to pass on their values, their morals, what they think is right to their children. You're actually separating, you're splitting off the generation. And that's, I think, a very detrimental thing.
Sure. So what do people need to do now, seeing that submissions have closed with regard to that bill?
Well, let's be watchful. I mean, there was, according to the Department of Education, there was an avalanche of objections.
Oh, fantastic.
So there were thousands of objections, and now they're obviously sifting through that and looking at it and hopefully taking into account the very serious reservations that were raised.
Okay, so that's definitely a prayer item. Michael, that's where we're going to have to leave it, but we're going to be continuing through the course of this year and through the course of the months connecting with you just to keep us up to date with these things. Before I let you go, though, is there anything else that you just want to quickly touch on, literally in 30 seconds or so?
Well, the other thing which we're going to be pushing forward on is obviously looking at what are the alternative solutions to the problems raised by the CRL Rights Commission's report.
Oh, yes.
And we are firmly convinced after our meetings with the COGTA Portfolio Committee last year that there is and there should be a process underway so that we can actually define what are the if you like, responsibilities that go with our religious freedom rights, particularly, so that people who are basically charlatans and chancers trying to hide under the guise of freedom of religion can be highlighted and potentially brought to book.
Now, that's very, very important. So another item that we just need to be aware of and pray into. Thank you so much for chatting to us, Michael.
Thanks, Jonathan.
It's really been great. Appreciate your time.
CCFM 107.5.